everyone, this is Brad from Heaven's Metal Magazine. Boy, have I got a treat for you today. I recently had the opportunity to sit down and talk with what I consider to be one of the most interesting people in the world. His name is Mark Hollingsworth. He is an author, music manager, radio DJ, label representative, Compassion International ambassador, etc., etc., etc. Mark has been in the music business since the early 70s and has a long-time history with some of our listeners and viewers' favorite artists, including bands like, Kansas and Petra and, bands like that. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Mark and let him tell you a little bit about his life story, and you can, listen in on the conversation we had. It was great catching up with Mark, and I hope you guys enjoy this.
We've had some good conversations over the years, and you've told some great stories. I thought it would be fun to get some of those stories on video, and we can get them out there for the Heaven's Metal audience to enjoy. Now, I know you don't have your musical tastes tend to be more progressive and less metal, but I'm finding that a lot of the metalheads, when they get to be my age, they tend to swing that way as well, get a little more into the progressive side of things.
Well, I still absolutely think the first 5 Black Sabbath albums are primo. They're just the best.
Well, there you go.
So, obviously that's not Christian metal, although they had some very Christian lyrics in those first 5 albums. A lot of people don't know that it was Geezer Butler who wrote most of the lyrics back in those days, and his brother was an Anglican priest. And so he copped a lot of ideas from his brother, and the songs like After Forever, well, actually Tony Iommi wrote that one, but so many of the songs talked about God and Judgment Day, and rights will be wrongs will be made right, and all of that sort of thing. It's amazing. I think very influential, not only musically, but I think lyrically on a lot of stuff that came after.
Well, I always thought they were a band that kind of got the raw end of the deal just from their imagery. So they did. Iron Maiden's the same way.
Mm-hmm.
Growing up in the church, goodness gracious, I grew up in a very conservative Baptist church, and all of those people, you were going to hell if you listened to any one of those guys. So
yeah.
I quickly outgrew that. I hit the teenage years and discovered rock and roll. And Mark, that brings us to my first question for you. And a lot of the people who listen to Heaven's Metal are huge Petra fans, and you have history with that band. Tell us a little bit about that and give us some good Petra stories.
Well, I got to know them right at the very beginning, 1972. Well, actually 72 is when they started, but I met them in early 73. And things were very primitive back then, as far as communication. There was no internet, there was no email, there was nothing. And so you just had to kind of find things, and there was no Christian magazines or anything at that point. So I was a student at Wheaton College, and I was into Christian rock, and Resurrection Band had just gotten started. Larry Norman had just released Only Visiting This Planet. It was still pretty small. There weren't a lot of offerings out there. And I had heard that there was this band out of Fort Wayne called Petra that was a 4-piece with dual guitars and sounded great. But I hadn't heard anything. Their album hadn't come out yet. And but I knew their agent and manager, Paul Craig Pano, who ran a legendary Christian coffee house in Fort Wayne called the Adam's Apple. And that's where the band got their start. And I got in touch with him about something. I can't remember what we were talking about, but I said, hey, is Petra ever going to play in the Chicago area? And he said, you're at Wheaton College, right? I said, yes. He said, they're playing there tomorrow. I went, what? Because I knew everything on campus. And it turns out that our college union had booked the show and they had forgotten they had booked the concert. So there was no advertising. There was nothing. I went over to the student union office. I said, there's a group, Petra, that's supposed to play here tomorrow. And they went, oh my God. They completely forgot. And so I just got word of mouth out. I hadn't even heard the guys, but I thought that they were pretty good based on what I had heard. And so literally only about 50 people showed up. And Bob Hartman at the beginning of the show said, hey, everybody come down here to the first few rows. Let's just be cozy here. And they rocked. They were so great. And, that dual guitar thing they had back then. And this was when Bob Hartman was the lead singer. And he sounded like a chipmunk or something. He's not a good singer. But they were really good. It was sort of Allman Brothers, Leonard Skinner, a little bit of Cream, just a real hard attack, hard blues rock. And they had a box of their first album. They just got them that day. And so I was able to buy one. And I wore the grooves out on that sucker. And we became fast friends after the show. I took them out to eat and we just started talking. And I ended up, I had a little booking agency called Rock of Ages. And I was booking Larry Norman and Randy Stonehill and Second Chapter of Acts and Barry McGuire and, all these different artists. And, so I talked to their manager, Paul Craig Pano, and I said, hey, can I help book some shows for these guys? He said, sure, we need all the help we can get. And so I started booking them out of my college dorm room. And one thing led to another. Years go by. And this was in 1973, as I said. And then fast forward 9 years, and I started managing the band in 1982. And had stayed friends with them all that time, and they had gone through various personnel changes, and but stayed pretty true to their roots. They were a rock band, and it was a hard row to hoe because Christian rock bands in the 70s did not get much respect, and innumerable times they were unplugged in the middle of their show because the pastor or the promoter or something thought they'd made a mistake and said, this just isn't of the Lord. And you just need to stop right now. And, lots of people would come up and witness to them, telling them that they weren't, following God's will or one thing or another. But all that to say, they persevered. And so in 1982, I was working for the Benson Company, which distributed Star Song Records at that point. And the band released Never Say Die, which was sort of their resurrection. They had essentially broken up for over a year. Bob Hartman had gone through a divorce, just felt like Christian music was ruining his life. He just didn't want to go through that anymore. He met a new lady, Kim. They ended up getting married. And he had a Bible study here in Nashville, and a couple of the guys in the Bible study were Mark Kelly and John Slick, and they really hit it off. And Greg Voles, this is a really interesting story. Most people don't know this. Greg had sung on the Washes Wider Than album, which came out, I believe, in 1979. Perhaps the worst album cover in the history of album covers. It looked like a soap detergent box. I mean, the name was stupid enough to begin with, Washes Wider Than. But anyway, but it had some good songs on it. And Greg Voles was singing on several of the songs and was touring with the band some at that point. But that's when Bob went through the divorce and decided just to call it quits. But Star Song Records, which had that album, they loved Greg and they wanted to continue with Greg. They said, we really believe in you. We think that you could be a great solo artist. Obviously you've got great pipes. And we think you could become something special. And to his credit, Greg said, well, I still really believe in the Petra idea. And I definitely believe in Bob Hartman as a songwriter. I want to keep Petra going. So if you want me, you've got to have Petra. And so the label relented and said, okay, if you can convince Bob, we don't think he ever wants to do this again. But Greg went to Bob and said, listen, I still believe in you. I still think that this could happen. And, do you want to give it a go? And because Bob had met these two other guys, John Slick and Mark Kelly, that he felt good about, and he said, well, let's do that. And so they put some new songs together. And Bob told the label, he said, I want to write songs the way I want to write songs. I don't want you to force me to write pop songs. I want to write rock songs. And so they said, okay, let's do it. And so that album, had Angel of Light and Chameleon and, some really good rock songs. But Bob did have a pop side to him. And so there were some good songs that way. And Greg brought some great songs from the band that he was in the early 70s called the E Band. And so these praise hard rock songs, Greg kind of helped invent that. And so without him, we can do nothing, praise ye the Lord, even the coloring song, that was all E-band material that Greg brought to the table. And so they had an album full of some really good hard rock and then some mellower stuff, and it just took off. And I was working for the record label, as I said, and helping the band with a lot of promotions and things. And one thing led to another. I left the label, and the band said, we'd really like you to manage us. And I had been, conversing a lot with Greg's wife, Becky Voles. She was sort of running the office. And so I just started doing that. And at that time, Greg moved to Nashville to be closer to Bob. And they got Jonathan David Brown to produce. They got a studio drummer on the record. And then eventually they hooked up with Louis Weaver, who had been in a band called Fireworks. And that sort of became the famous Petra lineup, those five guys.
I was aware of Fireworks. I didn't know Louis came from Fireworks.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, Fireworks had gone through a lot of changes, too. Initially, they were sort of a second chapter of Acts type sound, with at least one female singer named Gwen Moore, who still lives here in town, very talented, beautiful voice, and Marty McCall, was the head of the band. But then they kind of changed gears and went into more of a rock realm in the late 70s. And so Louis had been their drummer for several years. Louis had also been with the Randy Matthews Band before that. Okay. And but Louis said, man, if I could ever get in Petra, that would be the deal. If I could ever get in Petra. So, yeah, it ended up happening eventually. And then that was a really strong lineup for the next, 5 albums. And they really tore it up. Things started really slow with the Never Say Die album. The band was, just playing church basements and city parks and things like that. But the song, the coloring song, really took hold. And it was actually, I think it's still the only song in Christian music that was number one on 4 different charts. It was number one on Adult Contemporary, number one on Praise and Worship, or whatever they called it back then, number one on the rock chart, which, how did that happen? And number one on Southern Gospel. How did that happen?
Gospel.
Yeah. And the weird thing is the album, everybody wanted it, but the parent company, the Benson Company, was going through bankruptcy at that point, and they couldn't press records. And so nobody could buy the record anywhere. And yet the band was just hot as a pistol on radio. And but they got on that Servant World tour that year, and really great opportunity for the band because, you know, they weren't in a place where they could do a lot of their own booking or anything. And so Servant took them on, I think they went on about 70 dates across North America. And, you know, initially Petra was, you know, getting a 30-minute slot, and then it grew to 40 minutes and then 45 minutes and then an hour, because everybody was there to see Petra and not see Servant. And Servant still put on a great show, but I don't know how many nights there'd be 1,000 people packed into this school auditorium or something. And by the time Servant would come on stage, half the audience would have left because they saw Petra and that's what they wanted to see. So it was kind of a bummer for Servant, but it was a great opportunity for the band. So that's when I came in as their manager and said, well, we've got to start putting things together. And we started Petrified Productions, and there weren't very many promoters out there that could book Christian rock shows. So oftentimes we had to promote our own shows, just because if you went out on a long tour to the West Coast, you had to fill in those days with concerts. You couldn't just wait 5 days in between shows in Salt Lake City and Seattle. You had to fill it up, or you'd go broke sitting in hotel rooms. And so we just learned to contact different churches and book our own halls, and we would buy the radio advertising. And eventually we were doing almost all of our advertising on secular radio because we knew, you know, kids who liked rock, they weren't listening to Christian radio back then. It was pathetic. And so we thought, you know, let's go where the kids are listening. And we bought advertising on MTV, and you know, we put posters up all over this. You know, we would put up 500 posters in a city. You know, this was before you had Facebook and things where you could do real pinpoint marketing. So you just had to kind of blitz the area, but it worked. And we got to a point where we were selling out everywhere we went, and it was just an amazing time. The band graduated from, you know, traveling in a little van with a 10-foot trailer to 3 years later, you know, they had 2 buses and 3 semis, and they were headlining arenas. And it was a pretty crazy time, but it was amazing to go from, you know, they sold 80,000 albums in their entire first 10 years. And then in those 3 years, when I was managing them, we sold over 2 million albums, and nobody had ever seen anything quite like that. So there was just a lot of things we were learning as we went along. It was a lot to do, but it sure was exciting in many ways.
So when did you stop managing Petra?
That was, let's see, that was the middle of 1985.
So Beat the System?
Yes.
Yeah, around there. Okay.
Never Say Die, More Power to Ya, Not of This World, and Beat the System. And then they recorded the live album right kind of at the air when I was leaving the band.
Captured in time and space.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that I listened to that album 400,000 times or anything, but I listened to that album a lot. Yeah. So, Mark, when I first messaged you was on let me rewind. I first heard about you from your book, Embracing the Gray, which was recommended on Carrie Livgren's website. And that's when I reached out to you, and just to let you know, I really enjoyed the book. Tell me about your relationship with Carrie, and how were you instrumental in getting Kansas's light show for the Petra Not of This World show? So tell that whole story, because that's fascinating.
Okay. Well, in the mid-'70s, while I was at Wheaton College, besides running my own booking agency, I also wrote for a lot of publications in Chicago. The Illinois Entertainer was probably the biggest one, Triad magazine. And then I also, was sort of a stringer, had some stuff show up in Cashbox magazine and Record World and things like that. And so I would go to a lot of shows, write concert reviews, write album reviews, interview bands. And I had become a fan of Kansas after their first 2 albums came out. I just thought, these guys are amazing. Because I was a big fan of classical music and rock music, and of course, what became known as progressive rock, hence the Yes, sure, anything along that vein. And I just felt like Kansas was sort of the American version of Genesis or Yes. It just was amazing music with the violin and, very orchestrated, very complex music. And the lyrics were very interesting. And Kerry Livgren wrote most of the songs. And so I told the Illinois Entertainer, hey, I would love to do an interview with Kansas. And they said, okay, well, their 4th album is coming out here in a month or 2. So looks like they're going to have a show at the Randhurst Ice Arena in the suburbs of Chicago. We'll get you set up for that. And so, and I had been, interviewing Styx and Boston and Ambrosia and Atlanta Rhythm Section, lots of other bands. So I felt very comfortable doing all of that. But it was fun to finally meet Kansas. And I was definitely a fanboy, but I kept it together, while I was interviewing Kerry and Steve Walsh. But what was so funny about Kerry and I, we just hit it off immediately. During the interview, we realized we had the exact same favorite composers, Mahler, Debussy, Rachmaninoff, just so many of these, Wagner. And I loved all that stuff. And obviously he did too. We also found out we were huge Monty Python fans, and we were just quoting all these different things back to each other, and different novelists that we liked, Hermann Hesse, and all this stuff. And so my buddy who was with me, my photographer for all of my interviews and things, he said, it's like you guys are long lost twin brothers or something, because it's just creepy how much you guys like and seem to hit it off. And it was a wonderful interview. And from that point on, we became pen pals. I mean, I would write to him, he'd write back all the time. And he would call me whenever he was in the area. Hey, we're playing over in Madison, Wisconsin in 2 days. You want to come hang out? And so we just became good buddies. And it was evident that he was on a really deep spiritual search. And that was very intriguing to me. I could go into a really long, involved story, and it's all covered in my book. But the essence of it is, I sort of gave up on my faith towards the end of my time at Wheaton College. 3 of my dearest friends were all killed in different accidents and drug overdoses and whatnot in about it was about an 8-week period, I think. And I had lots of other questions that just weren't being addressed very well on spiritual issues. And I gave up on my faith. It just wasn't working for me anymore. And but this was around the time I was getting to know Kerry, and he was, deeply searching as well. And that was part of our friendship, is that we would talk a lot about all of these different religions and philosophies and what made sense and what didn't, and what was hypocritical and what was bogus. And so all that to say is, he ended up having a revelation and coming to Christ in the summer of 1979. And he was so excited to tell me about all of that. But here I had walked away from all of that. And so, he was trying to draw me back into faith. And so, we would have these long talks. I'd go see him at a concert. after the concert, we'd be at the hotel room and we would talk from 11 o'clock at night until sunrise. This happened several times. And, but it was, iron sharpening iron, I guess. It was definitely good because I was getting him to ask a lot of hard questions about his newfound faith. And at the same time, he was getting me to realize that, things that I had been battling with, could be dealt with. So fast forward several more months and I came back to faith, partially because of Carrie, but lots of other things too. And that, of course, was great for our friendship because we were on the same page then. Spiritually. And so we just, continued to do lots of things together. He eventually had me coming down to Atlanta very often to meet his wife and just spend time with him there. And fast forward a few years and I'm managing Petra and I would give him Petra albums and he really liked them. He thought Greg was a fantastic singer. He actually considered Greg as the replacement for Steve Walsh when Steve Walsh quit Kansas. But then he thought, you know what? Petra's really starting to take off. It would ruin their career if I took, if we took Greg Voles out of Petra and put him in Kansas, it would be great for Kansas, but it would not be good for Petra. And he didn't feel good about that. So he kind of withdrew that idea. But all that to say is, we didn't have a very big budget. And at one point I asked him after the Audio Visions tour, I said, Carrie, what are you guys doing with that big disc that you had over the stage, kind of a flying saucer looking thing? He said, it's just in storage. I said, are you guys ever going to use it again? Or are you going to, sell it to somebody or whatever? And he said, why do you ask? I said, well, we need some stuff. And our next album is going to be called Not of This World. It's going to have sort of this space theme. And I was thinking, maybe we could utilize some of that somehow. What would it cost to buy that from you since it's just sitting in storage? He said, let me get back to you. So he calls me back 2 days later. I talked to the band. We're just going to give it to you. It's a tax write-off. And so they gave us that, not only that disc, he said, we got a bunch of other stuff. Do you want it too? So all these Mylar panels and some extra lighting, floor lighting, and some risers that had clear plexiglass that you could shoot lights up through it and different things. He said, yeah, you can have all of this stuff because we're never going to use it. And so we just sent a Ryder truck down to Atlanta and just packed it full of stuff from the Kansas warehouse that they gave to us. And then we madly had to rewire everything and make it all work with the system that we currently had. I remember Mark Wozniak, our stage manager, had everything spread out on the back lawn outside of Greg Voles' house trying to wire it literally days before the Not of This World tour was to start. I mean, it was a massive headache, but we got it all working, and it definitely helped set Petra apart from a lot of other bands because we really had a top-notch light show and everything. And I will say when Carrie came to see the band, he was like, yeah, that looks really good. So he was pretty proud that he was able to help us add to our whole presentation that way.
Yeah, that always intrigued me. I won't take the time to dig it out, but I still have my signed program from that tour. The whole band signed it. And I remember going to Bob Hartman. I said, you have special thanks to Carrie Livgren on the liner notes for Not of This World. And what is that? And he told me the story. And I thought that was pretty cool. So, and then when I met you, I asked you about that. So thank you for sharing that again.
Yeah.
So Mark, you've, there was that old beer commercial, the most interesting man in the world. You know which one I'm talking about? Every time I see that, I'm like, hey, that's Mark. Because
I don't like beer, but yeah.
But you know what I mean? The most interesting man in the world. You've had quite the career, varied career, and not just in music. And you have. I mean, you worked in radio, you've worked in promotion, you worked for labels. But I think the biggest impact you may have had is your work with Compassion International.
Mm-hmm.
Would you mind giving me a career overview of everything you've, well, as much as you can touch on that you've done with Compassion International?
Yeah. Well, I in the late 70s, when I came back to faith, I'd been hearing about child sponsorship organizations, and I thought, that's a good idea. I want to sponsor a child, because sometimes you get overwhelmed looking at the needs in the world, and you go, how can I possibly make a difference? But the idea of focusing in on one person, one child, getting to know them, actually seeing the results of what you're doing, I thought that's a good concept. And so I'm a pretty detail-oriented guy, and I thought, well, if I'm going to do it, I want to find the best organization. And there were about 8 of them at that time. Once again, long before the internet. So the only way you could find out about these things was to go to a library. And so I went to the Skokie Public Library, where I lived in the northern suburbs of Chicago, and just proceeded to dig up everything I could on all the different organizations. And one of them was a very small, tiny organization, actually based in Chicago at that time, called Compassion. I had never heard of them. I was familiar with World Vision and Feed the Poor and, Food for the Hungry and, all these different organizations. But I had never heard of Compassion. But I thought, well, I'm going to call each one of these organizations and ask them a bunch of questions. And based on what they would say, that would help me make a decision. And some of the organizations, I would say, all of them, I said, can you send me your financial statements, some history on the organization, your mission statement, what it is that you're trying to do. And out of the 8, only 4 of them actually responded with anything. And so the other 4, which were fairly big, by the way, they were off the list. If they couldn't do that, they weren't worth my time. And of the remaining 4, Compassion was just the most attentive. I remember this little old lady was helping me, and she kept calling me back. Oh, I found out something else for you. She was just so helpful. And so I thought, I think Compassion is the one I'm going to do. And I just happened to go to a Randy Stonehill concert that night at Skokie Niles East High School. And I knew Randy, and we were, and he did a Compassion presentation. It was his very first Compassion presentation. And we were talking afterwards. I said, so is this a legit thing? Do you believe in it? He said, yeah, I do. I think they're really good. And so I thought, okay. So I signed up that night and sponsored a little guy from Haiti. And that's how it started for me. And within a matter of a year or two, into the early 80s, I thought, I want to work for these guys. So I started sending my resume out there, and they didn't have a place for me. They weren't interested in particular. And then I ended up starting to manage Petra. And as Petra was really starting to blossom and grow, I said to the guys in the band, hey, I really like what Compassion International does. There were only a few other artists at that point making presentations in their concerts, Randy Stonehill being one, Phil Kagi, Don Francisco, just a handful maybe. And they'd never really worked with a rock band before, but I said, I think I can convince them to work with us. And they said, well, yeah. It sounds like a good thing. We've heard good things about Compassion, so see what you can find out. And so I got in touch with Compassion again and said, I'm managing Petra now, and I think we could be great for you guys, and getting kids sponsored at our concerts. And they were a little hesitant at first, but they thought, well, let's give it a trial run. And so we did like 8 concerts. And just hundreds of kids got sponsored. And they were like, yes, please, let's do more of this. And so within a matter of a year or two, we became the all-time leading source of new sponsors for Compassion International. I mean, tens of thousands of kids got sponsored at Petra concerts. And I'm the one who came up with the idea, well, let's put an insert inside the album to let people know they can sponsor that way, or inside the cassette, or, eventually into CDs when those started coming out. So any of you people that got upset every time you'd open up your cassette and something would fall out, that was me. But man, did that work. Lots and lots of additional kids got sponsored that way. And so as time went on with Petra, as I said, it was a whirlwind of activity. It was very exciting, but it was also extremely hard and trying because we were breaking ground that nobody had ever broken before, headlining arenas and just all these extra pressures. And, it was a multi-million-dollar undertaking that had grown from, being a side room in Greg Voll's house with me and his wife to 18 people in the office and 20 people on the road and all of this equipment and everything. And it was just hard, and there were a lot of tensions that built up within the band, from outside pressures coming in, this and that and the other. And I just couldn't take it anymore. I decided I wanted to get out. And so I did. And immediately Compassion got a hold of me and said, would you like to come work for us? Because you seem to understand how to make these presentations work. And you came up with this idea of the inserts in the albums. We think maybe you could help us find some more artists and then help the ones that we already have maybe get better at their presentations and things. And so I ended up going to work for Compassion in the fall of '85. And then over the next 6 years, we grew the artist department. Devlin Donaldson, who had been in charge of it by himself at that point. So he and we grew that department from about 5 or 6 artists to, I think it was 52 artists in the next 6 years, and tens of thousands of kids getting sponsored every year. And I started the whole thing with the Compassion being at festivals, and that was a big source of many, many more kids getting sponsored. And it was that was a fun and exciting time as well. And ended up leaving after 6 years, wanted to get back into artist management again. So I did that in the '90s, and worked with Steve Taylor and Sixpence None the Richer and The Waiting and Small Town Poets. And I had a lot of success with those artists. But by the early 2000s, things were starting to change, with the advent of streaming. And boy, I didn't think labels had any idea what was going on with that. I would go and sit and talk with the heads of all these labels, and they either thought we're going to crush Napster, or it's just going to go away, or we'll figure it out. Well, none of those three things happened. and it got really hard in the early 2000s because the whole game was starting to shift. And so I thought, you know what, I've done this a long time. I think I'm ready to try something else again. And so my sister, who's a brilliant woman, she said, well, your heart has always been with the poor and helping kids, but you're really good at marketing and managing things. You just need to find something that marries those two things together again. So I started applying around to some different nonprofits like Habitat for Humanity and Amnesty International and several things, and was pretty far along in discussing things with them. And my old boss at Compassion heard I was looking, and he reached out and said, we'd love to have you back. We're reorganizing the whole radio department, and we think you could be the guy to help spearhead that. I said, man, I never knew that would be an option to come back. And he said, yeah, we'd love to have you back. So, I thought a lot about it, prayed, talked to different friends and things. And so I started back at Compassion in the spring of 2001 and in the radio department. And then that for the next 20 years, became my my area. And it was big again, lots and lots. I mean, I don't know, close to 200,000 kids got sponsored through radio events and over those years. And it was just really good. So I enjoyed that very much. But now I'm retired, and Still love helping kids and all of that, but I'm just not working full time for Compassion at this point, and just dabbling in various things, trying to figure out what's next.
And going to hockey games, right?
That's right. I love Nashville Predators hockey.
Oh goodness. You know what, Mark? I appreciate that. I appreciate the work and your passion for helping the unfortunate and the less fortunate. I won't say unfortunate, the less fortunate than us. We don't hear that a lot. But I will say that whenever I go to a Christian concert and there's not a Compassion or World Vision or other presentation, I'm kind of like, I miss it, because Casting Crowns does it. We the Kingdom has a presentation. Every year we go to Winter Jam and they do a presentation there. And so when I go to a concert and there's not one there, I'm like, something's missing, So, and we can thank you for a lot of that, I think. So that's awesome.
Yeah, and it's not just Compassion. All the other organizations kind of caught on as time was progressing, and so, as you said, pretty much every artist is representing somebody, and so as a result, just tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars, probably into the billions of dollars, have been raised to really help the less fortunate around the world. And so it's really neat to see how music can be used as not just an entertainment or an edifying thing, but it can also be a real motivating thing to help people want to roll up their sleeves and get involved in another way. And so I'm glad I could be a very small part of that.
I wanted to talk to you a little bit about your book, Embracing the Gray. I read that. That's when I reached out to you, was after reading that book, and it deals with doubt, and you handle it very honestly. And I'm a preacher's kid. I accepted the Lord when I was 8 years old, and I went to Christian schools my whole life, and even when I would feel like I was starting to doubt a little bit, I always felt guilty about it. And then I read your book, and it made me realize that God is big enough to handle doubt.
Mm-hmm.
And that has given me comfort, not just for me, but for family members and friends that are going through this time of, like you said, living in the gray, where I like your mental picture where you're flying through the sky, and you're heading towards the unknown, and you don't know. And it's a time of doubt. Tell me, I understand that was a lot of the chapters from that were blog entries. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And you tied them together. Tell me about the book and how that came about.
Yeah. Well, I guess around 2005, as I had mentioned earlier, I'd written a lot in my life, mostly music reviews and things like that, occasionally movie reviews and things. But I was just feeling like I was journaling, and it was just good to kind of establish landmarks for things that I was going through in my life, and just looking back at situations, good and bad, exciting and depressing, just all kinds of different things, and people would say, you've got so many interesting stories, you ought to write them down. And I found it to be really good therapy, just to kind of remember what brought me to that stage in my life, whether it was spiritual things or just philosophical concepts or just fun stories. So I started writing, and that's right when MySpace came out. I was on MySpace, and you could write these sort of blog entries, and they just sort of took off. People started reading them. I didn't even know who these people were. People were responding like, who are you? You didn't have to be a friend with somebody for people to see it. I can't really remember how the algorithms worked, but if something started to catch on, it would just sort of show up in people's feeds, I guess, based on what their likes were. And so I was getting responses from people that I didn't know from Adam. But so many people saying, wow, you nailed something that I have been thinking about, or, the way you worried about such and such is the way I've been concerned about something. And eventually people started saying, you need to compile this into a book, and I'd never thought about writing a book or anything, but as more and more people were saying that, I thought, well, maybe there's something here. So I started to look at all of the different blog entries and think, is there a way I can kind of tie these together? And so that's eventually what became Embracing the Gray when it came out 5 years later in 2010. And it got a lot of great reviews, and it seemed to be meaningful for a lot of people. And as I said, it was really just therapy for me. I enjoyed naming things. I think that's important in our lives, to name emotions and name doubts and name contradictions and all of these different things. And then by defining them a bit, it doesn't make it necessarily clearer. It just, you kind of realize I don't have to go back over that ground again, because I've kind of figured it out up to here. Now I'm still confused, but I think I figured out what got me to this point. And so that was a really helpful process for me. And, a lot of people have said, well, why don't you write another one? And I actually have about 3 more books in the can, but I kind of reached a point around 2013 where I just thought I'm over myself. I just don't think, I think I would just sort of end up repeating a lot of the same things. And that's one of my criticisms of a lot of authors, is they just sort of keep doing variations on a theme with all of their books, and it gets a little predictable. And I just thought, I don't want to be guilty of that. Now, that's not to say that I won't do them someday, but for the last, 8-9 years, I felt perfectly comfortable in not expounding on everything that I think about. I've been kind of quiet in that realm of writing more. Every now and then I'll write stuff, but it's just for me. And but as I said, I have a lot of stuff compiled from previous things, and so someday, maybe it'll happen. One would be a book on the music industry, because obviously there was a lot of stuff I didn't cover in Embracing the Gray. There was some stuff about the music field in there, but I've got a great title. I like it. It's called Riff Rock, which I can't believe nobody ever used that for a title of a book. It's just me riffing, on rock. But the subtitle was, let me see, I loved it. Now I got to remember what it was. Confessions of a Not So Holy Roller.
So, that's perfect. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was going to, talk a lot about my time, in the mainstream industry, but also, the time in managing Petra and all those other artists that I mentioned, and just a lot of fun and confusing and perplexing and wonderful stories about the music business.
Now, a couple of years ago, it was on the Joshua Tree anniversary tour. My son surprised me for Father's Day and bought me tickets to go see U2 playing at Louisville Stadium. Oh, it was amazing. And then I realized that everyone around me were wearing khaki shorts, New Balance shoes, and band T-shirts. It was pretty funny. I was amongst my people. But we were talking on the way down. That was after I had met you, and you had told us a fun story about getting to meet and getting to know Bono. And if you wouldn't mind, I know Bono is the opposite of heavy metal, but there's a lot of guys that I know would appreciate hearing your tale of getting to know Bono and interacting with them backstage.
Yeah. Well, their first album came out, what was that, 80 or 81? And I liked it, but it had such heavy reverb on it. And just the way Bono sang, you could hardly make out a word of what the lyrics were. And of course, then when you actually see them written out, you go, well, of course, they don't make sense. A lot of them are very, very obtuse, very, full of metaphor and imagery, but it made sense to him, I guess, but it didn't to a lot of other people. But the rumor was out there that they were Christians. And then they came out with their second album, October, and it was so clear. I mean, the lyrics were so clear, and just every song pretty much was about the gospel or about Jesus or about sin and dealing with your shortcomings and confessing, and it was wonderful. And I just thought, wow, now I understand what people were talking about with these guys. And they were coming to Chicago, and as I said, I was in the music industry and did lots of concert reviews and so forth. So I reached out to the Warner Brothers representative, because Island Records was distributed by Warner's. And I said, hey, this band U2 is coming. I'd love to see him. He said, oh, great. We hear great things about him, but we need people to come out and see him because nobody knows, And so they were playing at this small club called the Park West. It holds about 700 people. And I was dating a girl from England at the time. She lived in the States. Her name was Wendy. And I said, hey, you want to go see this band U2? And she said, oh, my brother's really into them, in London. And yeah, I'd love to see them. And so, we went to the show, and I'll never forget it. It was just one of those concerts, and I've seen over 2,000 concerts in my life. But it was one of those that'll just be boom, in my mind forever. Here was this pimply-faced kid, Bono, came in walking on top of the tables because it was a club, to get to the stage. And he was 19 years old, and he owned that stage, man. I'd never seen anybody so who could just captivate an audience, had them right in the palm of the hand, and wonderful, the whole show. And I kept looking at Wendy, and she's like, we were both like, this is amazing. Who are these guys, And so afterwards, there's this meet and greet in their little dressing room. Like I said, it was a tiny club. And so it was the size of sort of a normal bedroom or something. It was maybe 15 feet by 15 feet. And I think there were 50 people in there. It was shoulder to shoulder, just packed. And I had brought a bag of records, that I thought, maybe these guys will like these records. Because I was always doing that, with Kerry Livgren. When I first met him, I gave him albums of things I thought he would like. And he really dug that. And I did that with other artists too. And so I thought, maybe Bono, it's obvious they're Christians. Maybe they would like this stuff. So there was I think a couple of Bruce Cockburn albums, Inner City Front and Humans. And I think I put a Mark Hurd album in there, and a Daniel Amos, Alarma, and Andy McCarroll and Moral Support, which was a punk band from Ireland. So I thought, well, maybe they even know these guys. But they were all Christian bands or Christian artists. And so we're packed into this little room, and we see Bono, on the other side of the room. So we kind of work our way over to him, Wendy and I, and so we start talking to him and just having a nice conversation, but literally, really close, because it was so tight in there. And but he was so engaging, one of those guys. He has that gift, like Amy Grant has that gift. And so whoever he's talking to, he is completely focused on them. He's not scanning the room. He's not thinking about other things. He's just totally focused on who he's talking with. And so we're having a really nice conversation. And at one point, he says, what do you got under your arm? I said, oh, I brought some albums I thought you might like. Oh, cool. So I pull them out, and I'm telling him a little bit about them. And he's kind of looking at them. And he said, I've never heard of any of these people, And I said, well, these people are all Christians. And, I'm just presuming that you're a Christian, right? Are you a Christian? And it was so funny. He grabbed my shoulders and he went, "We're secret agents." And I thought that was fantastic. And so he said, "So you're a Christian too?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Oh man, come on." So he grabs me and Wendy by the hand and kind of we weave through this packed little room. He takes us over to Edge. He goes, Edge, excuse me, whoever you're talking to, excuse me. This is Mark. This is Wendy. They're Christians too. And Edge is like, "Oh," and he's like shaking our hands and so excited, to meet some other people that were of faith. And it was just a wonderful conversation. And then Larry worked his way over, the drummer. And so we're talking with him as well. And at one point, Larry is asking Wendy about her faith. And this is one of the things I loved about Wendy, is she was very, very honest. And she had gone through a really tough year. Her dad had been killed in a plane crash. He was a test pilot, and one of the planes he was testing failed and he died. And as you can imagine, it was very hard on her whole family. And so she said, "I don't know if I'm a Christian anymore. I just don't know why God would have allowed this to happen," and this and the other. And I'll never forget, Larry said, "Come here, I want to show you something." So he kind of leads her over, and there's a couple of chairs at the side of the room. And I'm continuing to talk with Edge and Bono and everything, but I'm kind of looking over there every now and then. And Larry pulled out this big Bible out of his little tour bag, and he's like flipping through, and he's just sharing different scriptures with her and everything. And so, another 10 minutes passes, and then their road manager comes in. "All right, boys, we got to go. We got to go to Detroit. Let's go. Get on the bus. Let's go." And so everything's breaking up, and I'm saying my goodbyes to Bono and Edge, and I talked a little bit with Adam too, but Adam was not a believer at that time. He was sort of the party guy in the band back then. So anyway, so we were all saying our goodbyes, and I noticed that Larry got up with Wendy, and he had written some things down, and so we were leaving, and Larry said, "Now we're going to be in London, at I can't remember, the Palladium or one of those halls. And, I want you to come, you and your brother to come." She said, "Okay," because she was going to head home for Christmas. And so "I want you to come." So afterwards, everybody's sort of leaving, and we're walking back to our car. And I said, "So what was Larry talking to you about?" And she said, "Oh, he wrote down all these scriptures that, can help, I think, as I'm feeling lost, and, that God doesn't forget us, and that God remembers us in our pain, and all of these different things." She said, I don't know where I feel about any of that right now, but I sure appreciate him, sharing that with me. And that it just gave me such an appreciation for those guys that just sort of went on, through the remainder of that decade, as I would see them at different times and different concerts and things. But just what a great way to get to know them at the beginning. And I still have a treasured postcard from the guys from the road, like I got about a month later, and said, "Mark, it's so great to meet you in Chicago. We really dig the Bruce Coburn record. We are really into that." And sure enough, a couple of years later, they did a song called "God Part 2," and they used Coburn's line, "I'm kicking at the darkness till it bleeds daylight." And I thought, yes.
That's awesome.
So,
yeah, I just found a box full of old cassettes, Mark, and was pulling them out, and I found my U2 October cassette. And it's funny, because I sound like such a hipster, but people are like, "U2." I said, "Yeah, but I was listening to them back when, when no one knew who they were." And so, yeah, that was great. I am not a musician, but I always hung out with musicians. And so I would hear about bands like U2 before they hit, because other musicians would pay attention to them, Like I was listening to King's X before anyone knew who King's X was, and bands like that, and all the musician bands, and those are who I still am drawn to the most. And you have introduced me to a ton of them through your prog rock promenade posts on Facebook. Thank you for those. For those of you who don't know, Mark posts these mini reviews and he point out stuff from progressive rock bands that recorded in Ireland in 72 or whatever, and and find some obscure song, and invariably they'll be wonderful. So that's awesome. I appreciate that.
Yeah, there's just so much good music that nobody ever heard of, or maybe it had a little pocket of popularity for a time, but if it still moves me, I like letting other people know about it, and maybe it'll move them too. So.
Hey, we really haven't talked in forever. What do you think of the new Kansas lineup?
I think they're fantastic. There's a lot of purists that would say, well, it's not the same band. Well, how many bands are, outside of Rush and U2 and ZZ Top? Of course, not ZZ Top now, because
ZZ Top
passed away, and now his bass tech is now playing bass, and he's doing great from what I hear. But
he looks just like him too. He's got the beard and everything.
Yeah. but it's pretty rare for a band not to have personnel changes over the years, and to consider that Kansas, the lineup that most people remember from 1973 to 1980, 81. Well, that was 7 years, 8 years. That was it. But they've been going on all this time. And so, of course, they're going to have changes. But I do think that the current lineup, it's back to 6 guys. And so, they can do more of the complex material. As Steve Walsh was getting toward the end of his time with the band about 8 or 9 years ago, he just didn't want to sing a lot of the complex stuff anymore, partially because his range wouldn't allow him to sing certain things. And he just didn't like all the noodly bits, as Neil Morse calls them. He just didn't want to play a lot of the complicated stuff. So when he retired and they got a new singer and brought in another keyboard player and other things, they suddenly realized, we've got the ability to go deep in our catalog again. And they have. And I think it's wonderful to hear songs that you really haven't heard them play in 30, 40 years. And they do a really good job. I mean, they sound as good as they've ever sounded. So I'm pleased with them.
Yeah, we saw them play Leftover all the way through, which is honestly one of the greatest albums ever recorded. And it was great. I have this really unique ability to pick concerts where my favorite bands play albums all the way through. It's been amazing. I saw Rush do Moving Pictures all the way through. I've seen Dream Theater do Scenes from Memory and Images and Words all the way through. So I started thinking about that. And the only one I did not get to see was Yes do 90125 all the way through. But I did see the last tour with Trevor Rabin playing just a couple of summers ago, and they did 5 songs off the album. So right. I almost got to hear it all the way through.
That was a great tour. I felt that version, whatever they were calling themselves, what was it, Anderson, Wakeman, and
Rabin, ARW, Anderson, Rabin, and Wakeman. Yeah.
But eventually they started calling themselves Yes, because that band is just constantly suing each other. It's just
it's funny.
But I thought they sounded fantastic, that lineup. And unfortunately, I saw that the other Yes was Steve Howe and Chris Squire, may he rest in peace. It was his last tour before he died, and Alan White, who can barely stand up. I mean, literally, he walked out on stage with a cane and could hardly play the drums. There was another drummer off to the side actually playing. Okay. The audience didn't see, but I could see him from my vantage point. And it was sad. It was just sad. They just couldn't do what they used to do. Chris Squire was still great. Hal was still great, but it wasn't John Anderson singing. And, John Davidson does a nice job, but I don't know. It just didn't seem to work very well. Whereas the Wakeman, John Anderson, and Trevor Rabin lineup was really solid, I thought.
Yeah. Trevor Rabin, in my eyes, can do no wrong. I don't think he's ever written a bad song. The guy's just a genius.
Did you ever hear any of his stuff with Rabbit?
Yes.
First band in South Africa.
It's great. Really good stuff.
he was like 19 or 20 when he did all that. Just amazing.
That was during like apartheid. So we didn't get to hear that until much later.
That's right.
Right. Which is crazy. Well, Mark, I tell you what, we've been talking for about an hour and Zoom did not cut us off at 40 minutes. So we didn't have to restart it. That's good. When I scheduled the meeting, they said you got a 40-minute time limit, but we're still recording. So I'm not going to push our luck. We could talk forever, I'm sure, but I think an hour is about as long as I want to push this. Is there anything you would like to say, you'd like to close with? I'm excited. There's a new King's X album coming out, and the guys are touring, so they're going to be here in Nashville in October, and very dear friends with those guys since the 70s. So real excited to see them again. And, they're all in their 70s now. Well, I don't think Ty is. I think Ty is about my age, but I know Doug is 72. Hard to believe. But anyway, you got to appreciate these guys for still doing it. So there's one of those few bands. It's been the same lineup the entire time. Yeah.
And I'm excited to see them. And then I'm also real excited about the Chagall Guevara get together. They just released a new album. In fact, I just got it today, the MP3. It's rocking. And they're headlining at the Ryman. And whoever would have thought this, but almost all of the seats have sold out.
That's great.
They could barely sell out a club when they were in existence. And now 30 years later, they get back together and they're going to sell 2,200 seats, it looks like. It's crazy.
Well, nostalgia is a powerful thing. And the audience from 22 years ago is old enough and has enough money to buy the tickets to go to the concerts.
And fly in from all over the world. I mean, people coming in from everywhere for this show. So it's really neat. It'll be a nice au revoir, from the band, and a nice way to kind of bring it all to a close 3 decades later.
Yeah. So I've seen King's X once in concert, and it was one of the greatest nights of music I've ever been to. It was for my 40th birthday. It was an outdoor concert. They opened for Extreme.
Wow.
And Extreme is one of the few bands that could play after King's X and not look foolish, But it was King's X opening. They had an hour set, and then Extreme played for 2 hours. And it was just, 3 hours of musical paradise. It was incredible. It was outdoors. It was a free show. We got there 2 hours early. I was 8 feet from the stage, sitting in my chair, and my family's like, "Dad, let's get up and go over here." And I'm like, "No, someone will take our place." So I made everyone sit there. and my poor wife, she was like, "Do I know any of these songs, any of these bands play?" I said, "Well, you've been married to me. You will have heard every one of these songs. You just don't know it." And so sure enough, every time a song comes, "Oh yeah, I know this one. Oh yeah, I know this one." Yeah. So that was a great night. And I'm glad they're touring again. King's X, that's all. And Extreme is supposed to be releasing a new record within the next year or so. So
what a talent powerhouse that group was. Really.
Man.
That Three Sides album still stands up incredibly well. And once again, very spiritual.
Very. Yeah. Am I Ever Gonna Change is one of my favorite songs of all time. Mm-hmm. And it's just, it's a song of, again, doubt. We talked about that. Yeah. Did you ever read Sharon's open letter to Eddie Vedder on abortion?
No.
It's Google it sometime, Mark. It's incredible. Sharon, he's such a good lyricist. He wrote this just wonderful letter, an open letter to Eddie Vedder about life issues, and it's basically when is a woman not a woman, and it's fantastic. Just a really, really good letter. Yeah, you would really appreciate it, I think. So you should look that up. So yeah, again, great band. Again, we could talk for another hour, but
well, thanks for having me. And if you want to do it again, let me know.
Yeah, I will. And what I would like to, Mark, is go back through your memoirs and think of some more fun stories, and let's do this again in a few months, because I know everyone's going to love this. They may not know who you are, but they will. And I'll do an intro explaining like how we met and all of that. And I think everyone will really appreciate hearing your stories.
Thanks. It's good to catch up with you. And everything good up in Ohio?
Everything is fantastic. My oldest son, just got a job as the worship pastor at Harmony Church in Georgetown, Kentucky. Nice. And this weekend he had to fill in on drums because their drummer got sick. And so at the end of the song, he's playing along and he throws in the drum fill from In the Air Tonight by Phil Collins to close the song out. Yeah. So he posted on Facebook and tagged me, and I was like, yeah, that's my boy. It's funny. He gets up on, he's at the church is, they let him play anything he wants to pretty much, but he's not, playing, any metal or anything like that. But it's funny because he has like a John Petrucci Majesty guitar, and he's up playing worship music with it, which is kind of funny,
Well,
yeah, he's doing great.
And the rest of your family, and you didn't make it down for Morse Fest, did you?
I haven't seen Neil since we saw him that night for the for the tour where we met at that Greek restaurant. Mm-hmm. So I haven't been able to get down to Morse Fest. Now, I did do a music video for the band Triton, which Eric Gillette played drums on. Mm-hmm. So I guess that's the closest connection I have to Neil Morse, is I did a music video for a band that Eric plays in. I have yet to meet Eric, but hey, I did a video for him. So hey, there you go.
Such a nice kid. You say kid, I mean, he's in his 30s now, but he's a kid compared to everybody else in the band. Yeah. But so talented. Oh,
he can freaking play anything and can sing. Like, his voice is amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, the whole band is like, when is he going to leave for greener pastures? They kind of feel like they're holding him back, but he loves it with them, and he does lots of other things too. Yeah. But he just loves being with them, and they're like, please stay as long as you want.
Well, they're a great bunch of guys, and I really loved watching. Neil put up the videos of like the audition videos, and Eric came in. He's got the long hair and stuff. Doesn't look anything like he does now, And Neil's like, we had no idea this kid could do all of this, And
he just auditioned for keys.
Yeah.
And they didn't know he could play drums until one night on stage. They just decided to switch instruments, and he's like killing it on drums. And they're like, what? So, yeah, I used to be a drummer, and then they
used to be.
Unbelievable guitar too, so, like you said, he can do it all. So
yeah, his wife Jackie, I guess, is his biggest fan. She's on Facebook pushing him more than he pushes himself. Mm-hmm. She promotes the crap out of him, which is great, But yeah, he's great. Now he did get to tour with Mike Portnoy. They did that when they did the sobriety suite.
12-step thing.
12-step thing, yeah. And he played the Petrucci solos.
Yeah, to a T.
Yeah.
He played perfectly.
And how many people can do that?
Right.
That's great.
Portnoy is one of his biggest fans and has really talked him up. And so a lot of people are discovering Eric Gillette now. So it's wonderful.
Yeah, that night we were just floored by everybody, and like Bill, we just knew him from Apologetics, which is kind of a joke, honestly. I was like, okay, he's from Apologetics, whatever. And then he's like phenomenal musician.
Yeah.
And then when they all switched around, we were just like, okay, can everybody play everything? I guess they can,
Yeah.
So that was fun.
And Bill, the We Came From Space, I don't know if you heard that album that he did with some of his other Pittsburgh friends. It's like pop prog, really good.
No, I'll have to look that up. Yeah.
The album came out, I want to say 3 or 4 years ago, and then they did an EP that was also very strong, but I guess a whole full album was coming out again, kind of the third project. And yeah, it was one of my favorite albums of that year when it came out, called We Came From Space.
We Came From Space. Well,
which is a line from some obscure science fiction movie back in the 50s or something. But really good stuff. And Bill wrote a lot of the music and sings a lot of the lead on it and stuff. It's really, really good. It's kind of a mix of Supertramp and ELO and Genesis and Kansas at times. Really, the guys are all good musicians and they all sing, and it's good stuff.
Is it more keyboard driven?
No, a lot of good guitar work on it, but the songs, like the longest song is like 5 minutes. So, Bill is more of a fan of the more concise kind of things. So it's kind of, in those vein.
Yeah. Unlike Neil, who every song has to be 20 minutes. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Well, Mark, man, I'm going to let you go. We've talked for another 20 minutes after I said, let's go. Let's sign off.
Well, as long as these Zoom gods let us, we might as well.
Well, thanks, Mark. I will edit this together and it'll probably be up in a couple of weeks. Sometimes it takes that long for the people who post it to actually get the message. Everyone who writes for Heaven's Metal, we're all doing it part-time. None of us get paid. It's a labor of love. Doug Van Pelt, who is the editor, he's been the editor since.
I know Doug.
Yeah, from, I still haven't met him in person yet. So I've yet to meet him in person. But it was funny how I got the gig. I had been writing little reviews on Facebook. And someone said, you should write for Heaven's Metal. They're starting up the website. And I was like, yeah, okay, whatever. So I just dropped him a email and said, what would it take to write for Heaven's Metal? And he said, well, if we like your style, all you got to do is send us whatever you write and we'll publish it. And I was like, well, that's pretty easy. So I sent him a review I did. I forget what it was for. And he messaged me back right away. He said, yeah, just send us all your stuff. We'll publish it. It was Theocracy. It was a Theocracy review. That's what it was. Yeah.
Nice.
So that's how then I make videos for a living and I interview a lot for my work. I work for the Air Force Research Lab up at Wright-Patterson. Actually, I work out of the house, but I did work on base for a long time. And so I interview a lot of scientists and engineer types. Mm-hmm. And so it's kind of nice doing interviews with folks that don't talk over my head too much, because I talk to those guys. It's like, I have no idea what you're saying, but it must be important. I don't know. But I can talk music with anyone. So that's fun.
That's great. All right, man. Well, have a good evening. And,
hey, you too.
Yeah, just keep me posted.
I will do that. Thanks again, Mark. I appreciate you, man. So look forward to seeing more of your reviews on Facebook.
Okay.
Okay, we'll talk.
Thanks,
We'll talk to you later.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.